Justice Bland was correct. To understand the juvenile system, to understand any system, sometimes we need personal experiences, stories. I was just at DC the other week. I do serve, I'm part of the coordinating council with the Department of Justice. And in that meeting, they actually brought forward a lot of individuals who spoke about their time, their experience in the juvenile justice system across the United States. So today we have Jennifer Toon. After being told as a child that she was in the Texas Youth Commission, now as we know, TGJD, because she had no soul, Mrs. Toon's mental health concerns went unsupported for 27 years, and that cycled her through the juvenile and adult criminal justice system. While stigma set this course in motion, person-centered practices, peer support, and trauma-informed approach helped Ms. Toon build resilience and change the trajectory of her life. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome Ms. Jennifer Toon.
Hi, it's me. I'm Jennifer, and I'm really excited to be able to share my story and my journey with everyone here this morning. On the slide, you'll see several pictures of me as a child. And I thought this was important as I talk, because a lot of times when we talk about kids in crisis, some kids, we have an idea of what that looks like. Right? But when you look at these pictures of me as I was growing up, it didn't seem like that on the outside. So, you know, thinking about my early childhood, I was born in Longview, Texas, if anybody knows where that is, in East Texas. I was born in 1979. I was born with a very thick, full head of hair, very dark eyes, and a big gash on my cheek. I had scratched myself on the way out. And I tried to find the hospital picture because it shows the fresh blood on my cheek. And I tell people it was my first self-induced wound with many more to come. So again, if you were here yesterday, I hope that you can maybe take some of the presentations from Dr. Keller and Director Lepore and kind of see that in my narrative as we talk about my journey with mental health in the system. So, like I said, my early childhood seemed very normal at first glance. We were a middle-class family. My parents grew up in East Texas. My father went into the military. Our home was very authoritarian, right? That parenting style. My parents married when he came back from the base. My mother was a housewife. She did a lot of volunteer work at the church. We went to church regularly, me and my brother. We were well-fed, cared for, but you dig a little deeper, right? Like Director Lepore talked about, talking to that client and saying, hey, you know, how was your childhood? Oh, it was fine. And then you dig underneath that. And someone mentioned yesterday, too, this reoccurring theme of intervention, like responding faster, quicker before crisis. And I really want you to pay attention in my story because it's still so hurtful to me to see all those moments of interventions where the adults in my life didn't intervene. But there were signs. So my mother, shortly after I was born, had a severe heart failure. She was in the hospital for almost 2 years. My aunt took care of me and my brother. My dad worked a lot. He was at the Air Force Base on the weekends and a month or two at a time. So I have memories from then. Did I not start the slideshow? Okay. Please. I had it timed so it would do it on its own. I'm not a multitasker. So my mom had been hospitalized, and I remember my childhood. There I am, that cute little baby. And I remember feelings and my parents to a certain degree, but you know, like in the Peanuts character, the cartoon, like the adults are just the legs and they're just Walmart. I don't remember my parents I wasn't connected to them. And my mother showed up eventually at some point, but she was not there shortly after I was born. And again, looking back at, how does that affect children with attachment styles, right? That deeply affected me. I didn't know that for years, My parents would brag that, I was such a good baby. I never cried. I never threw a tantrum. I never made a sound. And I remember telling somebody that later, and they're like, "That's weird." Like that may have been a sign, like that something was wrong. I think I can do it from this space. Okay. So here's a picture of me and my brother around that time. I think I was around 2. And it was also around this time that I began to experience some sexual abuse from another family member. But again, on the outside, everything looked well. There I am with my little doll at Christmas. So, I'm in this our family looked perfect, picture perfect on the outside. But that was not what was going on in the inside. So as I became a preteen, I learned to mask that, right? It was important that I kept that facade of wellness. I certainly didn't anyone to know about the abuse that was going on because I inwardly believed that was my fault. In our home, again, was that very authoritarian style of discipline and control. We didn't really have a lot of friends. We didn't really go to things other than to church activities. But I knew on the inside that, I was struggling. And as I became a teenager, and I think teenage years are hard for all of us, right? But my thoughts began to get much darker. It felt like my brain was betraying me. My thoughts and my feelings became very chaotic. I had this outward appearance of control and to put on a good face in front of people, but on the inside, it was just pure chaos. When Dr. Keller was talking about the symptoms and the signs of kids that commit mass shootings and acts of violence, the only thing that I didn't fit was the criteria to be a male. I think that's just because girls suffer in a way that is hard to detect. But I certainly fit all of that. It was the self-loathing, the hatred towards myself, towards other people, and just struggling I didn't know the word at the time, but it was dysregulation of my emotions. And it felt like not having any skin. It was just constant turmoil, and my thoughts began to get darker and darker. And again, there were signs. Where's one of the first places that there are signs that there's trouble with a kid? School, absolutely. I remember one of my teachers had told my attorney during my trial, when he was doing his discoveries and stuff, she said, "Well, we all knew, I had great grades, plummeted. I started dressing differently. I started picking fights. I started bullying and threatening the girls around me. I remember a teacher caught me with a knife and never reported that, never reported to my parents. And my attorney had told me, so I asked the teacher, why didn't you do something? She was like, yeah, I didn't know what to do, and it wasn't my business. And I think looking back, that comes from a very deep cultural, I don't know if any of y'all are from East Texas. It has one of the highest rates of suicide in the state. There is a deep stigma about mental health in East Texas. So I think that played a role into it. And my parents did find out about the fight. And the girl's parents called my parents and actually told my parents all the things that their daughter had told them that I had done at school, and how other girls were afraid of me. And my parents took me to a counselor. And I remember feeling kind of relieved, like, I know something's wrong, and I don't know how to ask for help. I'm, these symptoms are manifesting, and my parents don't believe in psychiatry. They don't believe in mental health, and they took me to a religious counselor, and that's not to say there's anything wrong with that, but that is not what I needed, because I had maintained for so long on sheer force of will, like, just behave. And yesterday we heard about, with the brain science of trauma, I don't know how to behave. You're asking me to do something that I don't know how to do, and my sheer willpower can only go so far. And so this counselor told me, it was a spiritual problem, that I needed to pray more, that essentially it was, my fault, that there was, something spiritually wrong with me, and to just double down and work on my self-control. Well, that only went so far. And, here I was 15, almost 16, and crisis happens. And it's violent, and it's devastating to my family and my community. But I never understood how people could say it was unexpected, because I could feel it coming. But, after crisis, which we see a lot with kids, right? Oh, well, now we're going to get treatment now that we've had a point of crisis. We had all these chances for intervention. But I remember very little after my arrest and my court proceedings. They come in just chunks of memories and thoughts, but very much the feelings. And a state psychologist interviewed me to make sure that I understood how to participate in my defense. I did not. If there's any attorneys and DAs and judges here, I'm telling you, those kids don't. I had no clue what was happening to me. And, I could describe to him what a judge does. A judge judges things. He was like, okay, great, you understand. And I took this moment that here he is, a doctor. He's an authority figure. And I took that moment to ask him, and I'm going to do my best not to cry, to ask him, why have I done this? And he told me, well, we know that some children are just born without what we call a soul. And he went on to say stuff about conscious, having a conscience. And this was the early 90s, to give away my age again. And the super predator theory. But I remember when he said that, being so confused and thinking, well, all that emptiness I've been feeling, maybe that's why, because there's nothing in here. Maybe the other lady was right about this being a spiritual problem. Did God not love me enough to put a soul in me? And I've struggled with that for almost 30 years. That never left me. I've had a lot of therapy since then, but that never left me. And my attorney hired our therapist, who I did a battery of tests, spent all day there, and then thank you, go back to your cell. And on the stand, he said that I had what was called borderline personality disorder, BPD. Never heard about it. No one explained it to me. I never received treatment during pretrial or trial. I spent my time in a concrete room with a mattress on the floor. Nobody explained anything to me. And that idea that I was not a whole person, it felt true, not just because of my mental health, but because in those court proceedings, even though I had a very nice attorney, everyone talked about me like I wasn't in the room, like I was a piece of furniture. Like they all knew what I needed. They all knew who I was. Not one person asked me what I needed. No, not one person explained to me what was happening. It just felt like I was awash in the system, that everything, again, was outside of my control. And when we talk about brain science and children not understanding consequences, I remember reading that in a newspaper when I was in prison years later. And I started crying. I felt so validated because it said, children don't understand consequences. And when I told the adults in my life, my attorney, the DA, the judge, I know what I did was wrong, but I didn't think that that this was gonna happen. Well, you commit this act of violence and you didn't think it was gonna be permanent? No, I don't know how to explain to you that I know that that this is bad and wrong, but I don't know how to connect to that this had anything to do outside of that day. Because for a kid, it's just that day. There's no concept of, the future. And I never, at the time, people didn't, I was so frustrated because the adults in my life didn't understand that I was deemed as manipulative and a liar. And even, I remember my attorney said, well, we're very thankful they did not try you, they're not going to try you as an adult. And I said, okay, no clue. Looking back now, thank you, Jesus. Oh my God, how close I was from not being able to stand here today. As a child, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't understand the gravity of what I had done or what was happening to me. I was tried under determinate sentencing and I was given 20 years. It didn't mean anything to me. Not because I didn't care what was happening to me, it's because it was a concept I couldn't wrap my mind around. So I was transferred to the Texas Youth Commission, now TJJD. I won't linger long on that part of the story. If I went into this system with just a fragment of trust for other human beings, those facilities and what happened to us there as girls obliterated that. Incarceration in Texas, whether as a youth or as an adult, incarceration is about survival. We certainly didn't have the wonderful therapy that saved my life. I find it hard to imagine if I could have accepted it in those settings. Because again, incarceration is about surviving. That's just the nature of being locked up in our current systems. And I know that's hard to hear for the people that work in those systems, because I do believe that you care and I do believe you have heart. But the system hurt me bad. And I was eventually transferred to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice when I turned 18, which I was actually relieved. But again, I spent 8 years surviving that system as well. And I did what I learned to do as a kid, which was I found things that I was good at, like writing, playing basketball, and teaching people about their health. And I just immersed myself in that, and I convinced myself. See, nobody had brought up my diagnosis again. Nobody offered me treatment. TDCJ certainly didn't, because treatment there is medication. And so, well, maybe there wasn't, maybe the mental health, maybe my parents were right, that's just made up stuff. Because no one ever, from the moment that doctor said that was my diagnosis, no one ever brought it up again. And there certainly was no treatment available to me. So I immersed myself in things that I tried to make my life normal, and avoided the violence in prison the best I could. My parents supported me, and They said, honey, it's just this bad thing that happened. It's over. It's done. Look how well you're doing. But again, I'm surviving on sheer force of will. And I always lived with this terror that I am hanging by a thread. So I did my time. I was eventually paroled and released back to East Texas to my parents' home. And I did pretty well, holding on by sheer force of will. Parole didn't mandatory, there was no treatment. Just make sure you make your appointments. And I eventually moved to Houston to work on my degree in journalism at the University of Houston. I was working at a nonprofit that went back on the inside to train the women how to be pure health educators. And once again, things look great. Things look really great on the outside. And that was not the case. Old triggers and new stress and the trauma that the system and the things that happened there, it was only, again, a matter of time. And again, signs. I had coworkers come into my office. I stopped showing up for work. They were concerned. I started drinking. That seemed like an easy way to self-medicate. Well, this was magic now. I just can go drink. Of course, we know that exasperated symptoms. And I know the word now is decompensate, right? And it was quickly. I tried to see a therapist, and I only went 2 or 3 times. I felt like she didn't understand me. It was that old rage again, this anger and this hatred towards myself and towards other people. And what happens? Crisis. I committed another offense, violated my parole, went back to jail, and I don't understand how people in my life, again, were shocked. We all saw the signs. I tried to ask for help in the only ways I knew how, which was acting out. But, I remember being in Fort Bend County Jail on the floor, and I was like, God, I don't know if you hear me or not. I've been told that you don't. But if you do, please help me. I don't want this to be my life. I had such a great life. I had gotten out and done all this great stuff, and now I've got to go back into a system I left and disappoint all the women and girls that I left behind. Please help me. And I remembered that diagnosis. I was like, oh, God, maybe that's it. Maybe that's the problem. Hi, it's me. I'm the problem. So I was determined that when I went back to TDCJ, I knew there wasn't going to be treatment. I was like, I'm going to use that self-will in a different way, and I'm going to study that diagnosis, and I'm going to study it, and I'm going to read, and I'm going to figure out if this is what's wrong, maybe that I can fix this. And I did that for 8, almost 10 more years incarcerated. I worked in the library. I devoured every self-help book, every book that I could get people to send me on personality disorders. And I started to practice those coping skills that I was learning on my own through these self-help books. And I immersed myself into writing for the prison paper and teaching the women about their health. And I finally was granted parole. And I was sent to in-prison therapeutic community, also known as SafeP, which amazingly, they put you in programming at the end of your sentence after you've been there for years. And now we're going to put you into programming at the end of your sentence when you're terrified about release, you're worried about a job, you've got all these other stressors, and you expect us to really absorb that treatment. Again, it goes back to the settings where treatment happens matters. It matters a lot because when you're in a state of survival, you don't process any of that. And if it's a setting where you've broken my trust, I don't want to hear any of it, period. Trust is monumental to treatment, especially for children. I guess we're going to dance now. but we can. Was that my, like, the Academy Awards when they're like, get off the stage? Okay, all right. I was like, all right. Okay, sorry, that threw me off a little bit. So I went to this program, which is mainly for substance use disorder, but I sat through it and didn't really absorb much of it. But I did catch one thing, and I thought maybe this might be key. It was a psychologist, the only one for Henley and Plain State. That's a lot of women to only have one psychologist, right? But he was very kind, a little awkward, but he treated us with dignity. He treated us like people. He said, yes, ma'am. No one had done that. Now, throughout my incarceration, I survived on morsels of that from staff, but it was far and few between. And I got to tell you, treating people with human decency and dignity goes a long, long way. And he introduced cognitive intervention. What? Wait a minute. You mean to tell me that I can choose my thoughts and that my thoughts are attached to feelings? So if I just change my thoughts, I won't feel this way? Like, I have some ability to really work with something. I don't have to be the victim of my own thoughts. So this was monumental for me. And I was released from TDCJ in 2018 on December 13th, which is Taylor Swift's birthday. And my colleagues and friends are horrified right now because I still found a way to work Taylor Swift into the conversation. But that was an important day for me because I was like, Lord, am I going to be okay? And it was Miss Swift's birthday, so that was a sign for me. And so I went to a halfway house in Beaumont, and I met a counselor who she taught us cognitive intervention. But the great thing, the really special thing about her was she had lived experience. So why is peer support and lived experience so important? Because I trust you. I trust you. I don't trust staff. I trust you because you've been where I'm at. And there is this thing that happens when you have mental health conditions, and certainly if you're incarcerated, certainly if you're a formerly incarcerated woman. Oh, you've been, girl, I already know. I trust you. You're not going to hurt me. You know where I've been. And so we would have our counseling sessions. And here was another thing that had never happened to me. It was very person-centered. Why are you asking me all these questions? Like, it was a trauma-informed model. Well, let's talk about, like, tell me about your childhood. Like, what are the things that you experienced? And what do you think that you need? I'm like, I don't know why this is happening. Like, nobody had ever done that for me before. And it was huge. It was a defining moment for me. Because then guess what happened? All that stuff I started to absorb it because I mattered. And she would tell me, honey, you're not inherently bad. Who told you that? You're not evil. You weren't born without a soul. And shame on him for ever saying that to you. You are a person. You made a mistake. You're not your mistake. That's not your whole personality. And so when I left the halfway house, I was put into outpatient care and went to group. And I hate to admit this, but I had a wonderful parole officer. It's so hard for me to give TDCJ any credit. And that's just from years of stuff, y'all. But the lady that supervised me, I was on super intensive supervision. She was very kind to me, and she treated me with dignity and respect. And we went over my treatment plan. It was still very person-centered. Like, how is this happening with a parole officer? It was more like case management. And the counselor I had at outpatient treatment was very much like the lady at the halfway house. But she also introduced strength-centered treatment. Like, okay, well, you have this disorder. Tell me about it and what you know about. Okay, well, how do we use that as a strength? So you're very good with seeing emotion. You're very good with reading people. You're very hypervigilant. How can you use that in a way that's productive? And I was like, oh my God, like I don't have to do destructive things with this. I can actually make this work for me. That sounds like a great idea. Um, and I began to do that. And I, again, surrounded myself with peers, people with lived experience who, helped me find employment, housing, and then I was able to transition and move to Austin, where I now work at the Coalition of Texans with Disabilities. I work at the intersection of criminal justice and disabilities and mental health with a strong focus on our kids in our schools getting intervention, and hopefully saving some little girl from what I had to go through. And this last picture is of me when I was 15. This was about, I don't know, about 6 months before crisis. And it's hard to look at her. I sometimes don't know who she is. But I'm proud of the journey that I've had because I have overcome. And I use all those experiences, as difficult as they are, to educate people, to create change, and to hopefully create better outcomes for kids that were just like me. So I was very honored to be included in the schedule today. I know I'm, 30 years away from this girl in this picture, but I'm still very much a kid in my mind. I don't know. I think that happens to you when you get arrested and go to prison when you're so young. You just kind of, something stays like that. But I was very honored to be here to share my experience. And hopefully, as you listen to other presentations and the presentations from earlier, you can make the connections through my story, and that I could give voice to those very things. Like, that's real. What he presented on, that's real. That really happened to me. And that really worked for me. If we have the courage to commit to it in the safest environments for our kids that we possibly can, and so that we can earn their trust and help them be successful. So I think I'm done. Thanks.